Back to today's video. Today is Friday, June 2nd, 2023, and today we are going to be talking about Governor Ron DeSantis and how he is ruining his chances at the 2024 presidential election. Now, a lot of videos, as I have mentioned in previous ones, have been around Ron DeSantis, but a certain part of an Axios article discussing Governor Glenn Youngkin's reconsideration about his bid for the presidency made me think about the 2024 race in an entirely new perspective. When Governor Glenn Youngkin was reconsidering a bid, there was one part that really struck out to me. Outside of everything with Glenn Youngkin's issue of electability or being not Trump but also not Trump light, a lot of these things we already knew about Glenn Youngkin from priors. But one thing that really made me think about this, really made me understand why Glenn Youngkin in the first place would initially deny his chance at vying for the presidency was because of Ron DeSantis. What's mentioned here is that from Axios' side, from internal sources, from those off the record, that some powerful GOP donors who won't support Trump are beginning to be concerned about Ron DeSantis and are now encouraging Glenn Youngkin to jump into the 2024 field. This alone stuck out to me to a way that I really did not expect. This is a new revitalized look at the 2024 race, and there's a lot to unpack. When you look at some of these articles, it starts to make sense about where this uncertainty really lies. When Governor Ron DeSantis went against the Disney family and the Disney Corporation, Republicans started to get worried. At least on my end, I thought that this worry would only be temporary, that there wouldn't be any lasting effects of the Republicans saying, okay, maybe Ron needs to let up on some of the more powerful corporations in order to at least make it through the primary, especially in the state of Florida. But as I'm starting to realize, there's a lot more at play than simply just discontent for a singular month that will subside and Republicans will back Ron DeSantis. It's starting to grow, and grow in a way that is going to ultimately ruin Ron DeSantis and his chance at winning the nomination. Because Governor Glenn Youngkin isn't the only one who's now reconsidering a 2024 bid. I don't doubt that there are many GOP donors out there that are considering pushing other Republicans into the race because they're concerned about Ron DeSantis' issue of electability and possibility of defeating Donald Trump. But what we know here is that because the Republican primary is built and structured in such a way that plurality victories often lead those instantly to the nomination, makes it seem as if Ron DeSantis, in a way, is pushing more people into the race, decreasing his chance at winning. And the reason I say that is because there is one person with an ever so reliable base on the Republican side, and it's not Ron DeSantis. It is President Donald Trump, who you can see out of the array of candidates on this list and the array of possibilities that people can choose instead of the former president, over 50% of Republicans are flocking to the 2020 election loser. And it's not as if Donald Trump was at 50% the whole time. For months on end, he was below 50%, indicating that the majority of the Republican Party was not immediately on board with choosing him as the nominee in the future. Today, the majority is. And what we know is that because Donald Trump has this extremely committed following, that these voters are not going to sway for anyone. But what we have seen is that they will sway. They will sway for everybody else. They'll sway for Ron DeSantis. They'll sway for Nikki Haley. They will leave their camps and go over to Donald Trump, the familiar name, the two-time nominee, now potentially three-time nominee. And the problem for Ron DeSantis lies in the fact that because he no longer portrays himself in this ever so electable manner as this person who for sure is going to take on the status quo, take on Donald Trump, he now comes across either as Donald Trump or as someone who is now losing by 30 points in the polls, despite expected to be such a monumental candidate and potential challenger against the former president. And that's where this problem lies. It's this self-reinforcing cycle. As Republicans push others to enter into the race because they think that Ron DeSantis might be in this feud, that Ron DeSantis might be in this difficult position because of the stances that he's taking, because of the challenges that he's building for himself, they're now pushing other people into the race that decrease his chance at winning. I think what the Republican Party major donor base fails to realize is that Ron DeSantis' best chance is one-on-one against Donald Trump. And for as long as Nikki Haley and Mike Pence, and now Mike Pence is actually announcing a 2024 bid on June 6th or 7th, so this is right around the corner, what we see here is that when other people enter into the race, only one major candidate takes a hit, and it's not Donald Trump. It is consistently Ron DeSantis, where you are seeing people peeling away from him and backing other candidates, backing Tim Scott, backing Nikki Haley, backing Mike Pence. That is a problem for Ron DeSantis, because what we see in the 2024 polls, and I can show you this now because it will explain a lot further about why this self-reinforcing cycle is so dangerous to Ron DeSantis, but is entirely of his own doing. What you see is that in the 3-way, 4-way, 6-way, 10-way races, Donald Trump leads tremendously. 31 points over, 33 points over. And in no reality does Donald Trump lose to Ron DeSantis in most cases, because of the fact that he already has the majority of the GOP base on his side. But what you will find is that if it was a head-to-head race, Ron DeSantis doesn't lose by 30. Sure, he still loses by 25 in some, but 12 in another, 15 in another, 11 in another. You start to see where this gap has narrowed up in a way that allows Ron DeSantis, should he have a striking debate performance, should he have a few more monumental endorsements down the line, that it's within reach. But another point that I touched on is that Republican politicians, Democratic politicians do not like to back losers. They do not like to put their heads out for someone who are going to lose from the start. And that's the problem that Ron DeSantis has as well. There's a reason why people are willing to quietly go to Axios and say, we are worried and concerned about Ron DeSantis. Start up this circulation about another candidate running. Start up this conversation about another Republican that would be better than Donald Trump, better than Ron DeSantis even, but not do so publicly. Because they know the repercussions of not going against Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a petty politician. No matter what way you cut it, if you are not with him, you are against him. And that is the problem, I think, that really lies in the fact that many Republicans refuse to come out in support of Ron DeSantis. It's as if Donald Trump dominates this party, because he absolutely does. But Ron DeSantis is not doing himself any favors. I mean, this concern about DeSantis' electability and, his situations with the Disney Corporation, with anti-gay legislation, with anti-abortion legislation. Republicans are the first ones to declare pro-life, but even Donald Trump admits that a 6-week ban is too extreme. Most women don't know they're pregnant until after 6 weeks. Ron DeSantis knew exactly what he was doing by passing one of the most restrictive abortion laws in the country in the 3rd most populous state. Ron DeSantis has turned Florida into his political breeding ground, into his political safe haven. And while he was reelected by 20 points in 2022, which is an indicator that the state of Florida loves Ron DeSantis, it doesn't mean the rest of the country will, nor that the policies that he applies in Florida would fly in the rest of the nation. That is the problem that DeSantis has. And donors, allies, fellow Republicans are concerned about this. And now, not only are they encouraging others to run, like Mike Pence, like Glenn Youngkin, they are now sending money. Glenn Youngkin just recently received another $1 million donation. Glenn Youngkin cannot run for re-election. That's something we need to acknowledge. Glenn Youngkin cannot run for re-election. So where is this money supposed to go? Probably towards a future presidential bid that Glenn Youngkin said he would consider following the 2023 Virginia elections. But it isn't just him that's considering entering into the race. I mean, we've seen the way that Republicans are dabbling in this idea that they might run. Those who have already, announced, you have a list of 7-8 candidates. Those who have announcements pending, Chris Christie, supposed to announce on June 7th. Mike Pence, supposed to announce on Christie was 6th, Pence was 7th. Doug Burgum, governor of North Dakota, not a major name, but still someone who has started recording ads, started preparing his presidential bid on June 7th. And I know it may seem as if these are no-name candidates besides Mike Pence that are going to receive, 2-3% of the vote max. That matters. When the difference in a head-to-head matchup in some polls is 11 points, 2 to 3% split across multiple candidates, being taken up by multiple candidates, absolutely matters. And those with the decision pending, Chris Sununu. You have other people, governors. Even if you look down the list of potential candidates, people who have not ruled it out. Kristi Noem, she would be a very interesting candidate. Glenn Youngkin, considering it absolutely. Ted Cruz, not so much running, but did acknowledge that his second place primary performance in 2016 does absolutely make him a viable candidate. Greg Abbott considering, it seems, or not considering, but not denying it. Those who have publicly expressed interest. Rick Perry, who ran for president twice. Will Hurd, a U.S. representative. Liz Cheney, we know her. John Bolton, we also know him. My point is, there are enough candidates out here that I think saw Ron DeSantis as their saving grace, the one person who could finally take down the president, and now he is failing to do that. He's failing in some polls to crack 20%. That is dangerous for these anti-Trump Republicans. That is dangerous for the Republican Party base that would so desperately want to see anybody else than the person who lost in the last election. But it is that thinking that drives others into the race as well. Because Ron DeSantis is faltering, Republicans that have major backings, major donor bases, now think they are the ones to do it. DeSantis failed. He was given this platform. He was given this opportunity. He was within 10 points, striking distance of Donald Trump in the multi-way race. And yet, he lost it. His peak was before he even announced, and he simply cannot get back there. Polls taken following his announcement, we can see here. CNN, Trump plus 27. Quinnipiac University, Trump plus 31. Fox News, Trump plus 33. The trend here I'm noticing is that it's up, not down, for Donald Trump, and down for Ron DeSantis quite consistently, 26 to 25, and now to 20. So why is this so important too? Well, the last thing I want to point out is that because all of these other candidates are entering into the race, we are starting to see a complete and total repeat of the 2016 Republican presidential primaries. And I know that Ron DeSantis' campaign has pushed back on this notion so desperately because they know that if it is taken that way, they lose. If 2024 shapes out the way 2016 did, Ron DeSantis loses. In many people's eyes, he's similar now to how Ted Cruz was, going to receive about 25% of the Republican primary vote, yet will probably lose the delegate count by over 1,000 delegates. And it isn't just Ted Cruz or Ron DeSantis who will be up there. It'll be Tim Scott. It'll be Nikki Haley. It'll be Mike Pence. It will be a considerable portion of the Republican base that doesn't want Donald Trump again, but can't make their mind up and cannot consolidate around a candidate. So let's take a look. I think another reason why this is important is because I mentioned this briefly. But because the Republican primary is not entirely proportional, unlike the Democratic primary, they have winner-take-all states. And the reason why that matters is because it completely separates certain candidates from the rest of the race. For instance, in the state of Iowa, Ted Cruz won. He won 8 delegates there, but Donald Trump won 7, and so did Marco Rubio. Fast forward to New Hampshire, though Donald Trump received just 35% of the vote, he received over 50% of the delegates. Around 50% of the delegates. In South Carolina, this is the big one of the very early primary contests, it is a winner-take-all delegation, which means with Donald Trump's 32.5%, he received 100% of the delegates. If Cruz and Rubio were a candidate together, they would have won this race and probably stopped Donald Trump's early climb in the primary process. But it didn't end there. Nevada, Donald Trump received 45.7% of the votes. Received roughly that same proportional amount, but it was that momentum from South Carolina and New Hampshire that propelled him to victory. What you can see here, too, is in Super Tuesday, and a consistent factor here is that Donald Trump is not receiving over 50% of the vote. In Alabama, 43.4% of the vote. What that means here is that he's receiving less than 50%. Do you want to know how many of the delegates he won? 36 out of 50, roughly 72% of them. It doesn't end there. In Arkansas, Donald Trump received 1.8% more than Ted Cruz. How many of the delegates did he win? 100%. I mean, what you find here is that with the system that is set up, with the way that Donald Trump was able to win these races, I mean, one consistent factor here is that practically in every single race, he was never at 50%. Yet he dominated in this primary process, and you can see it. I mean, you can see that even with the end of the primary process in totality, Donald Trump still only received 44.9% of the vote, and yet received a considerable portion of the delegates. In terms of his statewide victories, he had some, But you will find here that in many of these races, he was able to do such a tremendous feat. And one major state that will shake up the race, and I think will cause a lot of people to drop out as it did in 2016, is the state of Florida. Is Ron DeSantis' home state. And what I'm telling him now is what I'm telling you all too, is that Marco Rubio came from the state of Florida. And yet Donald Trump completely wiped him out. It's a winner-take-all state. It's 99 delegates. It's going to be more now because it's grown in population. And Donald Trump didn't even win 50% of the vote. But you know who didn't do well? Marco Rubio. And I see very similar things happening between Ron DeSantis and Rubio to a point where DeSantis might even be out by the time Florida comes around. So all in all, because Ron DeSantis has caught himself up in this lovability problem, has caught himself up in these business feuds with the Disney Corporation, has caught himself up in these culture wars that are not winning issues for the Republican base that even Donald Trump has come out against, has caused many of the top Republican donors and allies that initially backed Ron DeSantis, that were hoping for a significant change in strategy, that simply are not getting it, saying that they were excited about DeSantis' candidacy but fear the door is closing. They now believe doors are opening elsewhere. They see it in Glenn Youngkin. They see it in Mike Pence. They see it in Nikki Haley. They see it in Tim Scott. And what happens here is that the money flocks away from Ron DeSantis and funnels right into other candidates. And even if they are receiving just 4% of the vote, even if they are receiving just 3.8% of the vote, or 2.6, or 1.6, or 1, right? What matters here is that at the end of the day, what you find is that when you combine the vote share of those for Donald Trump and those against, the race gets a lot closer. But when the against is split, as it was in 2016, you're doomed to fail. But that self-reinforcing cycle, when DeSantis makes himself unelectable, it forces other people into the race, thus decreasing his electability. Somebody's going to have to change. Either Republicans are all going to have to drop out and endorse Ron DeSantis, or he is going to be the reason, not Donald Trump, but he is going to be the reason that he loses the 2024 GOP nomination that at one point in time was so well within reach. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.